The year is 1997 and the NBA is throwing a celebration of its best players in history in Cleveland during the All-Star game. It was the first time Wilt Chamberlain and Michael Jordan met. It didn't take long for the two to start arguing who was the better player. The debate was won by Wilt. Just remember, Michael, when you played, they changed the rules to make it easier for you to dominate. When I played, they changed the rules to make it harder for me. MJ didn't have a comeback, and reasonably so. It's difficult to argue there is a greater compliment from a change in the rules just so others would have a chance playing against you. Here are some of the most important rule changes caused by players. Leroy Edwards, the 3-second rule. The 3-second rule states that a player cannot remain in the opponent's restricted area around the backboard for more than 3 consecutive seconds while his team has the ball and the game clock is running. The rule was implemented in 1936 to prevent big players from controlling the area and to prevent rough playing under the board. History recognizes Leroy Edwards as the man that caused the rule change back in 1936. He was a 6'5" center in the early days of professional basketball, and a physical one at that. Edwards dominated so much that teams felt they had no chance if he was allowed to roam underneath the basket. Despite the rule change, Edwards was one of the best players of his era. George Mikan, defensive goaltending. At 6'10", George Mikan was the most athletic big man basketball had seen so far. His height and athleticism gave his team an unbeatable advantage. Mikan would swat balls away as they were going to the hoop. Mikan was able to do this as early as his college days at DePaul University, so the NCAA made goaltending illegal in 1945. George Mikan and Wilt Chamberlain. Free throw lanes widened. In the NBA, George Mikan controlled the area around the basket to such a degree that in 1951, the league widened the free throw lane from 6 to 12 feet to give other players a chance. Then, in 1964, Wilt Chamberlain showed up and dominated even more, so the lane was widened the second time from 12 to 16 feet. Wilt Chamberlain, free throw plane. Okay, widening the lane for the second time wasn't expected, but it wasn't out of the blue. What Wilt did during free throws was a whole different story. Chamberlain was so athletic that he would throw the ball up toward the basket, take 2 steps, jump toward the rim and dunk the ball. Absolutely no one could stop him. Rumors of this got to the NCAA and NBA, and both organizations introduced a rule stating that a player cannot cross the plane of a free throw line when shooting a free throw. Wilt Chamberlain, inbounding over the backboard. Another rule change courtesy of Wilt Chamberlain. Inbounders standing underneath the basket would routinely lob the ball over the backboard for Wilt, and after teams found no way to defend this, the league created a rule that the ball could not be inbounded over the backboard. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar dunking ban. Zion Williamson got famous thanks to his dunking highlights in high school. If he had played in Kareem's time, that would have cost him a suspension. When Kareem, Lou Alcindor at the time, arrived at UCLA, the heads of NCAA felt his ability to dunk the ball at will was such an unfair advantage, they banned dunking, as in any form of dunking altogether. The Alcindor rule held from 1967 to 1975, when it was rescinded, and players were allowed to dunk again. The consequence of this decision, you might ask? Alcindor had to find a different way of scoring in the post. He started working on a hook shot. 38,387 points later, Kareem and his skyhook are still number 1 on the all-time scoring list in NBA history. They wanted to prevent a dominant post move to give people a chance, and they got the skyhook. Talk about unintended consequences. Trent Tucker, minimum shot time. The 89-90 season was the first year the league had used tenths of a second in timekeeping. In a tie game against the Bulls, the Knicks' Mark Johnson inbounded the ball to Trent Tucker with 0.1 seconds left. The Bulls were preparing for an alley-oop, believing a shot couldn't be released in such a limited time, but Tucker caught the pass and made the game-winning three-pointer. Though the play was upheld after review, the NBA later determined that a player couldn't get a shot off in less than 0.3 seconds. Charles Barkley and Mark Jackson, the booty rule, aka the 5-second rule. Sir Charles was surprisingly physical for his height. Barkley would match up against taller, stronger players and regularly win the duel. One of his favorite moves, back down a player for 20 seconds, use his quite large behind and create space and then shoot or pass. Mark Jackson had the same move for backing guards down in the post, so the league created the 5-second rule. The league stated that no player below the free throw line could actually do this for longer than 5 seconds. Shaquille O'Neal, zone defense. Before Shaq's three-peat, zone defense wasn't allowed in the paint and all coverage had to be man-to-man. There was no chance for teams to defend Shaq without double or triple teaming him. Zone defense was allowed, changing the way every team in the NBA defends the lane nowadays. Bruce Bowen and shooter landing area. The San Antonio Spurs are the model organization of the NBA. 20 years of 50+ regular season wins and playoff appearances. The Spurs do things the right way. Well, that's what they tell us. Remember the fury of Greg Popovich and the organization when Zaza Pachulia slid his foot under Kawhi in the playoffs? How could you forget? But do you remember the name everyone mentioned when talking about karma? Planting your foot under a player while he was in the air wasn't a Bruce Bowen original. But he mastered the move to such a level that NBA instituted a rule in 2006 that says players must have a safe space to land. What goes around comes around. Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoy our content, please subscribe.